Thanks very much, Hugh, and thank you very much for having me. Thank you firstly to CAUSINDY for inviting me to speak today, and certainly it's with some trepidation that I address an audience like yourself with such experience and such accomplishment, and I come to you bearing my stories of failure and discomfort. So we're going to, I hopefully keep in time, but I want to tell you a couple of stories, and the first story I want to tell you is the story of how Indonesia and I first met. Not met in that kind of slutty, cooter kind of way, and not met under the chaperone of my parents, but the time that Indonesia and I truly embraced each other. And I was 18 years old, and it was January 1998, and I was travelling with two beautiful, pale girlfriends, and we decided to embark on an epic trip. We would go from Bali to Kupang, across the archipelago, and we would just throw ourselves into Indonesia and embrace culture and embrace local tradition and hopefully be embraced in return. And we spoke the language, and we wore long shirts, we wore sarongs, we took buses, and we spoke very humbly to anyone that would address us. We weren't going to be ordinary backpackers, no. We were great travellers, on an epic journey. So it was January 1998, I remind you, and we were fixed on the quest, we were so fixated on the quest for culture and local knowledge that we kind of forgot about politics. We didn't notice the zeros being added to the rupiah on the whiteboards out the front of the monetary change. We didn't notice the way that Indonesians were at every moment huddled by the televisions watching what was unfolding. By the time we hit Inner Flores, Indonesia was a country crunched in tension. In Ende, we narrowly missed a riot. In Mone, at the foot of the Kelimutu mountain, a young Indonesian sang Iwan Falls, as they do, and declared the end of the new order. This is in February, by the way, so very early. By the time we hit Maumere in early February, the island was under military curfew. We still didn't seem to understand. We bought traditional kain, we bought ikat, and we sort of teetered around our hotel room feeling very self-congratulatory. Now, one day, in the midst of all this tension, we went to the Maumere market in our big hats and our sarongs and our long-sleeve shirts, sort of waiting to kind of talk to some locals. And suddenly, this red thing just flew past my peripheral vision. And I thought, what is that? And then another one through, and I thought, gosh, that's a tomato. And then suddenly, we found ourselves being pelted with tomatoes in the Maumere market. It was one of my sort of residing memories of this great trip. Years later, I was working in Indonesia, and I met a woman who had just recently done her master's in Australia. And I asked her how she found Australia, and she said it was very agreeable, it was very pleasant. But it was 2002, and Australia was doubled over in its own pain from the losses in Bali. Australia was sort of running hot with an anger towards foreigners and Muslims. I asked her if she experienced any racism, and she paused and she told me about a day when she and her friends had gone to visit the Blue Mountains, seeking their own sort of exotic Australia, and as they were walking home, they were pelted with rubbish. Go back to where you came from, they said. So this is a part of our history where two countries that unfortunately stand at their borders throwing rubbish at each other. And the counter to friction is sort of initiatives like this, and conferences and workshops and new Indonesia centres and Australia centres like at UI. We talk about regional cooperation. In Australia, we talk a lot about the Asia gap and bridging the Asia gap. We talk about building Asian literate societies and Asian capacities and Asian skills and competencies. And we're all here, presumably, because we've got them or we are on the way to getting them. We pride ourselves on cross-cultural skills and the skills to avoid conflict with our neighbours. We have the skills to effectively wash away past hurts. We're the regional ambassadors of a great mutual partnership. And even though after 15 years of living and working and researching in Indonesia, I'm a really fully paid up member of this club, I hear this kind of talk and the description of a relationship as a set of competencies with some kind of unease. I mean, I work in Asia and I love Asia and I've devoted my life to it, and I haven't done it sort of armoured in a series of skills with an armour of Asian capacities. So if you can bear with me, I'm going to tell you another story. So my career is founded in kind of the underbelly of, I guess, Indonesian politics, violence and corruption. And most recently, my attention has turned to police violence and the torture and murder of young criminal suspects by the Indonesian police. Now, it's a tough topic. In Indonesia, understandably, it raises hackles. In Australia, it really feeds stereotypes and mistaken conceptions. So I really wanted to present this research in a way that would speak across the seas. I wanted to make something non-academic that could bring two places and two peoples together. And I decided to make a radio documentary because, unlike film, radio makes you listen and it makes you imagine and it makes you part of the story. It makes you complicit in it. So I'm just going to play a minute and a half of it if you'll entertain me. So I made this documentary last year, and I arrived in Indonesia with zero skills in documentary making. I just turned up with a recorder and I was going to make this documentary, and then I realised, gosh, I have no idea how to do this. So I rang some friends, some Indonesian friends who work in Jakarta as radio journalists, and they taught me everything that they knew about making radio documentaries. They made fantastic documentaries and they passed on some of that genius. They taught me how to hold the recorder, they taught me how to interview a subject, they taught me how to listen and to find the sounds that would shape us a place and to record them. And they also introduced me to a lot of the people that became subjects for the documentary, and one of the journalists actually became part of the documentary. So it was a real, true collaboration across seas. And we committed to making the documentary into English and also making an Indonesian version that would later be broadcast in Indonesia. And it was a real collaboration forged on a love for storytelling and a love for great stories that can speak across seas. So the documentary came out earlier this year in April, and it got a really good reception. And the reception I was really concerned about was Indonesians. And so one of my Indonesian friends living here in Australia, she listened to it and she said that the story was beautiful and it compensated for the odd feelings she gets when her country's ulcers are revealed. But then things got a little bit funny. So some people involved with the documentary got sort of threatening phone calls. Another friend of mine, an Indonesian friend of mine, said that he went and apologised to the police for his involvement in it. I was invited to speak by an Indonesian student organisation and they retracted that invitation. And then finally, the group of amazing progressive Indonesian documentary makers that I'd worked with rejected the piece. And they said that they had been misled and they didn't understand what the piece was about. And they said they didn't want anything to do with it, and we were never going to make this Indonesian documentary. And this final rejection from my collaborators and the people who had taught me everything about documentary really came as a blow, and I was really deeply hurt. To me, the documentary was a love letter to a country that I've known and loved longer than my own child, than my own husband, and many of my own siblings. So to have it rejected was really baffling. Now, I tell you this story not as a comment on Indonesia or Indonesians or even the people involved, but I tell this story as a critique on competence and the idea of competence as a means to navigate the perils of cross-cultural engagement. You guys may never fail, as the story I've told you here, but if you're not failing a little bit sometimes, then I think you're running away from the possibility of truly building something new and of the possibilities of a true engagement. And this is why I think the rhetoric that reduces cross-cultural engagement to a set of skills or competencies gives me a bit of a bellyache, because the language of competence suggests it's parallel, incompetence. And when things go wrong, either I'm incompetent or they are. And I actually think the problems can be much bigger than that. I think if we're going to commit to a cross-cultural exchange, then we need to do it with the recognition that no amount of competence can triumph the simple human awkwardness of relationships and the fact that people bring their own politics and histories to the table. So in talking about a cross-cultural relationship, I urge you to embrace a language of discomfort and risk, and to thicken your skins against the possibility of failure, even after decades of success. And when failure happens, we need not to armour ourselves in skills and competencies, but reach inside ourselves for our common human elements, for our faith, for our passion, and for our eternal curiosity about the other, and just get up and start again. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqui. I think Jacqui was a bit worried that she was going to go first because she was worried that it was going to be a bit too downbeat, but I don't think that was the case. And I think it's a fantastic point that the risk of constantly emphasising our differences is we forget the fact that we have many similarities at the same time.